It's the 1990s, color TV exists, the internet exists, and in the middle of Europe, a genocide is happening. 8,000 people executed in a single week, while United Nations soldiers stand less than a mile away. This isn't a story from a history textbook chapter you skipped. This is the deadliest war you've never heard of. You already know this is real. It happened in Europe, and it killed around 100,000 people. That part's not in question. But most people think the worst atrocities of the last century ended in 1945. Genocide, mass executions, ethnic cleansing, that's something that happened back then in black and white footage before the world was watching closely enough to stop it. But this genocide didn't happen in secret. It happened with NATO jets in the sky and UN peacekeepers on the ground. And in one specific moment, the very system built to protect the victims is what delivered them straight into the hands of the people who killed them. Here's what you're dealing with. Around 100,000 dead, more than 2 million people displaced from their homes, over 8,000 executed in a single week in a town that was supposed to be the safest place in the entire country. And in 2007, an international court ruled it the first legally recognized genocide on European soil since World War II. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the population of a mid-sized American city, gone in a war that ended less than 30 years ago, in a country most people couldn't find on a map. So here's where we're going. First, how one country's collapse got hijacked by one man's ambition. Then, how a safe zone became the deadliest trap of the entire war. In 1991, Yugoslavia is falling apart. Communism is failing, the economy is in ruins, and the 6 countries that made up the federation start pulling toward the exits. Slovenia and Croatia fight wars to leave. Macedonia gets to walk away peacefully. But Bosnia is different. Bosnia is the one country in this entire federation where no single ethnic group is a majority. Roughly 44% Bosniak, 31% Serb, 17% Croat. For decades, that didn't matter. Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats lived side by side under one shared idea, Yugoslavia. But once that idea collapses, nobody wants to end up a minority in someone else's new country. In 1992, Bosnia holds an independence vote. 63% of the population turns out. 99% of them vote yes. But that number is misleading because the Bosnian Serbs boycott the vote almost entirely. Most of them have no interest in becoming a minority inside a Bosniak majority state. So they don't wait for the vote to settle anything. They declare their own country inside Bosnia's own borders. It's called Republika Srpska. No country on earth recognizes this new state except one, the one that matters, Serbia, led by a man named Slobodan Milosevic. Milosevic built his entire career stirring up ethnic tension between Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks. And now he sees an opportunity. Use the most powerful army left over from Yugoslavia, still dominated by Serb officers, to help the Bosnian Serbs seize and hold territory by force. Within weeks, Serb forces surround the capital, Sarajevo. Tanks, artillery, snipers, positioned on the hills overlooking the city. What follows is the longest siege of a capital city in modern warfare. Civilians shelled and shot at for nearly 4 years, in a city that was Bosniak majority, but where Serbs and Croats lived too. 11,000 people die in Sarajevo alone before the siege ever lifts. This is the part most people get wrong. They picture this as ancient hatred boiling over, two sides who simply hated each other for centuries. It wasn't. It was a power vacuum, and one man weaponized it on purpose. There's also a detail almost nobody includes in this story. Bosniaks and Croats started this war as allies against the Serbs. But partway through, that alliance collapsed, and Croat forces turned on the very Bosniaks they'd been defending, laying siege to the city of Mostar, destroying mosques, killing civilians in a city the two groups had protected together just a year earlier. The war wasn't two sides. For a stretch of it, it was three, fighting in shifting directions at once. Why does any of this matter to what happens next? Because it sets the conditions for the single worst moment of the entire war. A fractured alliance, an international community already exhausted by years of broken ceasefires, and a Serb army that by 1995 controls roughly 70% of Bosnia and is looking for one final move to end the war on its terms. And that's just the setup. What happens next is the part most people genuinely don't know, because the worst single event of this entire war didn't happen in a battle. It happened inside a town the United Nations had already promised to protect. By 1993, the UN designates Srebrenica a safe area. The idea is simple. Civilians inside are protected. Bosniaks living there have already given up their weapons. Years before the worst day of the war ever arrives. The protection comes with a trade. Surrender your ability to defend yourself, and the UN defends you instead. By July of 1995, Srebrenica is guarded by 370 Dutch peacekeepers, lightly armed, massively outnumbered. When Bosnian Serb forces under General Ratko Mladic move in to take the town, the Dutch commander requests NATO air support. It's denied. Bad visibility. Then Serb threats to kill Dutch hostages and shell the very civilians the strikes were meant to protect. Mladic and his troops walk into an empty Srebrenica and take it without a real fight. He's filmed strolling triumphantly through the deserted streets like a man taking a victory lap. Within hours, somewhere between 20,000 and 25,000 terrified Bosniak refugees are crammed into and around the UN compound at Podgorica. Mostly women, children, the elderly, the disabled. Little food, little water, sweltering July heat. People trampled in the panic. And here's what almost nobody knows about what happens next. As the refugees are loaded onto buses to evacuate, Serb soldiers start pulling men and boys aside, some as young as 14. The women and children are bussed away. The men disappear behind a building Dutch-backed soldiers later called the White House. Gunshots, 20 to 40 an hour, all afternoon. Some executions at night under floodlights. Bulldozers, pushing bodies into mass graves afterward. Over 8,000 men and boys executed in a matter of days. This was a system built specifically to protect these people that disarmed them, isolated them inside a safe zone, and then couldn't stop the people who came to kill them. In 2007, the International Court of Justice would confirm what a UN tribunal had already ruled. This was genocide, the first legally recognized genocide on European soil since the Holocaust. The war ends in December of 1995 with the Dayton Accords. The borders drawn that month still split Bosnia today. One half mostly Bosniak and Croat, the other half mostly Serb, called Republika Srpska, the same name the breakaway state took back in 1992. Slobodan Milosevic stands trial in The Hague for genocide and crimes against humanity. The trial drags on for 4 years, but in 2006, he's found dead in his cell of natural causes before the court ever reaches a verdict. The man who lit the match never officially faces judgment for it. A UN tribunal would go on to try 161 people for war crimes committed during this war. Generals were convicted, decades-long manhunts ended in arrests. But the man who armed the breakaway state and recognized it before anyone else did, he walked out of this world without a verdict attached to his name. So why haven't you heard of this? Maybe because it doesn't fit the story we like to tell about the modern world, that genocide is something humanity left behind in grainy black and white footage. Bosnia happened in your parents' lifetime, with satellite news cameras rolling, with the United Nations standing in the same field where it happened, and it's already being forgotten. If you want more of the history that actually gets left out of the textbooks, this is exactly the kind of story I want to keep telling. Let me know what you want covered next.